The safe door swung open with a mechanical click that seemed too loud in my son's empty bedroom. I had expected documents, maybe some savings bonds I could move to the living room where the afternoon light was better for reading. Instead, I found myself looking at 6 driver's licenses arranged in 2 neat rows, each with a different name, each with my son's face staring back at me. Below them sat bundled cash, the bills crisp enough that I could hear them when I shifted the top stack with one finger. And beneath the money, a manila folder held photographs of people I recognized from the news coverage I had seen 3 weeks earlier about the data breach at the regional hospital network. I did not touch anything else. I closed the safe door slowly, feeling the mechanism catch, and sat down on the edge of Marcus's bed. The mattress was firm, the sheets hospital corner tight. He had learned that from me during his brief attempt at pre-med, back when he still returned my calls. My hands were steady, but my breathing had gone shallow in a way I recognized from the operating room when a procedure revealed something unexpected. The afternoon sun cut through the blinds in precise lines across the carpet. Dust hung suspended in the light. I could hear the kitchen faucet dripping 2 rooms away, a sound I had been meaning to fix since I arrived yesterday. The house-sitting arrangement had come through Marcus's landlord, who knew I was a surgeon and assumed I was responsible. Marcus had left a week ago for what he called a consulting contract in another state. He had given me the alarm code and the spare key, asked me to water the plants and collect the mail, and mentioned nothing about a safe behind the false panel in his closet. I had found it while looking for extra blankets. The combination had been taped to the back of his desk drawer, written in his neat small print on a piece of medical tape, the kind we used for labeling specimens. I stood and walked to the window. The street outside was quiet, lined with modest rental houses and small front yards. A child rode past on a bicycle. Somewhere a dog barked twice and stopped. These were the sounds of ordinary life, the same sounds I'd been hearing for 2 days while I stayed in my son's house and tried to understand how we had arrived at this distance between us. The divorce had been difficult for him. His mother's remarriage had been worse. I had offered to pay for the rest of his education. He had stopped answering my messages instead. I had not spoken to Marcus in 7 months. Before that, our conversations had grown shorter, his tone more clipped, until the exchanges felt like reading from a script neither of us believed in anymore. I had thought time would soften whatever anger he carried. I had thought my presence here, taking care of his house, might be a first step toward repair. Now I stood at his window and understood that I knew almost nothing about the person he had become. The photographs in that folder were clear enough that I recognized 2 faces immediately. One was a hospital administrator who had appeared in multiple news interviews after the breach, explaining how patient data had been compromised. The other was an IT consultant the articles had mentioned as part of the internal investigation. There had been others in the folder, maybe 8 or 9 more images, all printed on standard photo paper, all showing people in professional settings. Some appeared to be surveillance shots taken from a distance. Some looked like they had been cropped from larger group photos. I had only glanced at them before closing the safe, but the images stayed in my mind with the clarity that comes when your brain knows something matters. I walked to the kitchen and poured a glass of water from the tap. The plumbing groaned softly. I drank the water standing at the sink, looking out at the small backyard where weeds had begun to overtake the flower bed. Marcus had never been interested in gardening. That had been his mother's domain. I set the glass down carefully, watched a bead of condensation slide down its side and pool on the counter. My phone sat on the kitchen table, screen dark. I could see my reflection in it, distorted and small. For 26 years I had made decisions in high-pressure situations. I had stood over open bodies and chosen the next move based on evidence and experience and the understanding that hesitation could mean the difference between recovery and catastrophe. I had learned to separate emotion from action, to let my hands move while my mind stayed clear and focused on the problem at hand. But this was not a surgical problem. This was my son, and the evidence suggested he was involved in something that required me to choose between protecting him and doing what I knew was right. I picked up my phone and opened the browser. The hospital data breach had made regional headlines for a week before fading into the background noise of daily news. I found the articles quickly, read through them again with more attention to detail. Approximately 40,000 patient records had been compromised, including social security numbers, insurance information, and medical histories. The breach had been discovered during a routine audit. Investigators suspected an inside job but had made no arrests. The hospital network had offered credit monitoring to affected patients and promised a full review of security protocols. The incident had occurred roughly 3 months ago. I set the phone down and walked back to Marcus's bedroom. The safe sat behind the false panel, invisible unless you knew to look for it. I thought about the combination written on medical tape. I thought about the 6 licenses, each one a separate identity, each one a federal crime. I thought about the cash, which I had not counted but which appeared substantial enough to suggest this was not a small operation. And I thought about my son, who had been 12 when I taught him to tie a surgical knot, who had been bright enough for medical school but had chosen computer science instead, who had grown distant not because of any single fight, but because of a slow accumulation of disappointments that neither of us had known how to address. The correct action was clear. Evidence of potential criminal activity required notification of authorities. I had taken an oath to do no harm, and that oath extended beyond the operating room into the basic framework of civic responsibility. But the moment I made that call, I would be choosing the law over my son. I would be the reason he faced investigation, potential arrest, the unraveling of whatever life he had built here. I would become the father who turned him in. I returned to the kitchen and made coffee, measuring the grounds with the same precision I brought to dosing medications. The machine gurgled and hissed. I sat at the table and waited for the pot to fill. The house was very quiet. Through the window I could see the neighbor's cat walking along the fence line, placing each paw with careful deliberation. When the coffee was ready, I poured a cup and added nothing to it. The bitterness felt appropriate. The phone on the kitchen wall was an old landline that Marcus had kept connected, probably for the alarm system. I looked at it and wondered who I would call first. The police seemed wrong, too blunt and immediate, but I knew a federal prosecutor from my hospital's legal staff, someone who handled medical fraud cases. I could describe what I'd found in general terms, ask hypothetical questions. That felt like a delay tactic, a way to avoid the real decision by splitting it into smaller steps. I drank the coffee slowly. The afternoon was settling into evening. I'd told the landlord I would stay through tomorrow night, collect the last of the mail, lock up on my way out. Marcus was not due back for another week. That gave me time. But time for what? To search the rest of the house? To confront my son when he returned? To walk away and pretend I had never opened that safe? My hands were still steady. That was something. I set the cup down and stood, walked back to the bedroom, opened the closet, moved the false panel, and dialed the combination again. The safe opened. I took out my phone and photographed the contents, careful not to touch anything, using the camera's flash to ensure the details were clear. 6 photos of the licenses, 2 of the cash, 1 overview of the folder with several of the photographs visible. Then I closed the safe and replaced the panel and left the room. I sent the photos to my own email from my phone, then deleted them from the device. It felt like a middle ground, a way to preserve evidence without committing to action. It was not a middle ground. It was cowardice dressed up as caution. I knew that, even as I did it. Dinner was a sandwich I did not taste, eaten standing at the counter. I washed the plate and the knife and put them away. The house was clean, almost sterile. Marcus had always been neat, but this felt different, more like a hotel room than a home. There were no photographs on the walls, no books on the shelves, nothing personal except a single framed picture of him and his mother at his high school graduation. I was not in the photo. I had been in surgery that day, an emergency case I could not postpone. He had understood, or he had said he understood. I sat in the living room as darkness filled the windows. The neighbor's porch lights came on in sequence down the street. A car passed, its headlights sweeping across the ceiling. I did not turn on any lamps. I sat in the dim glow from the kitchen and thought about the last conversation I had tried to have with Marcus. I had called him on his birthday. He had answered but said he was busy, promised to call back later. He never did. I had not pushed. I had told myself he needed space. I'd told myself I was respecting his boundaries. Maybe that was true. Maybe I'd just been relieved to avoid another awkward exchange. The data breach had been sophisticated. The articles had mentioned that repeatedly. It was not the work of an amateur. Someone had understood the hospital's security systems well enough to extract patient data without triggering immediate alarms. Someone had known which records were valuable, how to access them, where to sell them. The investigation was ongoing, the article said. They were reviewing all employees and contractors who had system access during the relevant time period. Marcus had worked as an IT contractor for various medical offices before taking this recent consulting job. I knew that much from brief updates his mother had passed along. He was good with computers, she said. He was making decent money. He had moved into this rental house 6 months ago. She thought he seemed happier, more settled. I had wanted to believe her. I slept poorly on Marcus's couch, waking several times to the unfamiliar sounds of the house settling. Each time I woke, I thought about the safe. Each time I told myself I would decide in the morning. Morning came with gray light through the curtains and the beginning of rain against the windows. I made more coffee. I checked my email on my phone, looked at the photos I had sent myself, studied the faces on the false licenses. Young, confident. My son's face, but somehow not his face. The expressions were different, the way he held his jaw, the set of his eyes. He had practiced these looks. He had known he would need to become these other people. I called the hospital where I worked and told them I needed 2 more personal days. They said it was fine, my cases were covered. I ended the call and sat with my phone in my hand. I could feel the weight of the decision pressing down, making the air in the room feel thick and hard to breathe. A surgeon learns to trust his instincts. A father wants to believe in his child. Those 2 things were at war in my chest. I spent the morning searching the house with methodical care. I did not disturb anything, but I looked in every drawer, every closet, every cabinet. I found nothing else unusual. The rest of the house was exactly what it appeared to be, a young man's rental, clean and sparse and temporary. But in the office, on Marcus's desk, I found a notebook filled with what looked like login credentials and system diagrams. I photographed several pages. I did not understand most of it, but I recognized medical facility names in the margins. 3 different hospitals, 2 urgent care networks, all within an hour's drive of this house. By noon, the rain had stopped, and a weak sunlight broke through the clouds. I made a sandwich I did not want and ate half of it. I was stalling. I knew I was stalling. Every hour I waited was an hour I was choosing inaction, which was itself a choice. If Marcus was involved in criminal activity, if people's medical data was being sold because of something he had done, then my silence made me complicit. But if I reported him and I was wrong, if there was some explanation I had not considered, then I would have destroyed what little remained of our relationship for nothing. I picked up my phone and dialed the prosecutor I knew. Her name was Ellen Marsh. We had worked together on a malpractice case 2 years ago. She answered on the 3rd ring. I told her I needed advice about a hypothetical situation. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "If this is not actually hypothetical, you need to report it now." "If it is hypothetical," she said, "the answer is the same. Evidence of identity fraud and possible connection to a data breach requires law enforcement involvement. There is no gray area." I thanked her and ended the call. My hands were shaking now. I set the phone on the kitchen table and pressed my palms flat against the surface until they were still again. Through the window, I could see the neighbor's cat returning along the fence, retracing its path from yesterday. The same careful steps, the same deliberate placement of each paw. I walked to the bedroom and opened the safe one more time. I looked at the licenses, the cash, the photographs. I thought about Marcus at 8 years old, asking me to explain how the heart worked. I thought about him at 16, angry about the divorce but trying to hide it. I thought about him at 22, telling me he was dropping out of medical school, his voice flat and his eyes avoiding mine. I thought about all the moments when I could have said something different, done something better, been more present in his life instead of present in an operating room. Then I closed the safe and called the police. I told them I had found evidence in my son's house that might be related to an ongoing criminal investigation. I gave them the address. I told them I would wait. They said someone would be there within the hour. I said I understood. I sat in the living room and waited. The house was very quiet again. After a while I heard sirens in the distance, growing closer. I did not move. I sat with my hands folded in my lap and watched the street through the window until the police cars pulled up outside. 2 uniformed officers came to the door first. I let them in. They were polite and professional. They asked me questions. I answered them clearly, without emotion, the same way I would describe findings in a medical case. Then the detectives arrived, and after them a team from the Federal Cybercrime Division. I showed them the safe. I gave them my phone so they could see the photos I had taken. I explained about the hospital breach, about recognizing the faces in the photographs. They asked if I had contacted my son. I said no. They asked where he was. I said I did not know, only that he had mentioned a consulting contract out of state. They asked for his phone number, his email, any other contact information. I gave them everything I had. They asked me to leave the house. I packed my small overnight bag and carried it to my car. An officer walked with me, asked a few more questions, gave me a card with a case number. They would need to speak with me again, he said. I might need to testify if this went to trial. I said I understood. He thanked me for calling it in. He said I had done the right thing. I drove home in the late afternoon traffic, the radio off, the silence in the car absolute. My phone rang twice. I did not answer. When I reached my apartment, I parked in the underground garage and sat in the driver's seat for a long time before I could make myself get out. The elevator ride to my floor felt endless. My apartment was exactly as I had left it 3 days ago, clean and organized and empty. I set my bag by the door and walked to the window. The city spread out below, lights beginning to come on in the dusk. I had lived here for 4 years since the divorce. I had chosen this place because it was close to the hospital, because it was practical and efficient and required no maintenance. I had told myself I was simplifying my life. Now I understood I had been hiding from it. My phone rang again. This time I looked at the screen. It was Marcus's mother. I let it go to voicemail. I could not talk to her yet. I did not know what I would say. After a few minutes, the phone buzzed with a message. I listened to it. She was calling because Marcus had tried to reach her, said something was wrong, said I had betrayed him. Her voice was strained and confused. She wanted to know what had happened. She wanted to know what I had done. I called her back. I told her everything, the same clear recitation I had given the police. When I finished, she was quiet. Then she said, "He is still your son." I said, "I know." She said, "How could you do this to him?" I said, "How could I not?" She hung up. I made dinner out of habit, ate without tasting it, cleaned the dishes, and put them away. I tried to read a medical journal but could not focus on the words. I turned on the television and then turned it off. Finally, I went to bed, though I knew I would not sleep. I lay in the dark and listened to the sound of the building, the distant elevator, footsteps in the hallway, the hum of the heating system. Normal sounds. The sounds of a life continuing. In the morning, there was an email from the detective in charge of the case. They had arrested Marcus late last night. He had returned to the house while they were still processing the scene. He had not resisted. He had not said anything except to ask for a lawyer. They had found additional evidence on his computer that confirmed involvement in the hospital data breach and 2 others. The federal charges would be substantial. The email thanked me again for my cooperation. I read the email 3 times. Then I closed my laptop and got ready for work. I had a full surgical schedule. People were depending on me to be present, to be focused, to do my job with the same precision and care I had always brought to it. I could not let my personal situation interfere with that. It was the one thing I knew how to do without question. The day passed in the familiar rhythm of pre-op consultations, procedures, post-op check-ins. My hands were steady. My mind stayed clear. Between cases, I stood at the scrub sink and watched the water run over my fingers and thought about nothing at all. My colleagues asked how my few days off had been. I said they had been fine. No one pressed for details. In the evening, I received a call from Marcus's lawyer. He wanted to know if I would be willing to speak with Marcus. He said my son was asking for me. I said I would think about it. The lawyer said time was a factor. I said I understood. I ended the call and sat at my kitchen table with a glass of water I did not drink. 3 days later, I went to the detention center where Marcus was being held. The visiting room was institutional and cold, divided by thick glass. Marcus sat on the other side, looking thinner, older, exhausted. He picked up the phone on his side. I picked up mine. He said, "Why?" I said, "You know why?" He said, "I am your son." I said, "I know. That is why this is the hardest thing I have ever done." He looked at me for a long time. Then he said, "Those people got their credit monitoring. No one was actually hurt." I said, "That is not true, and you know it. You violated their privacy. You sold their information. You made money from their vulnerability. That is harm." He said, "You always thought you were better than everyone else, always so certain about right and wrong." I said, "I am not certain about anything except that I could not stay silent. I am sorry it cost us this. I am sorry I could not protect you from the consequences of your choices. But I cannot apologize for making the choice I made." He set the phone down. He stood and walked away without looking back. The guard escorted him out. I sat holding the phone for a moment, longer, then set it down and left. The months that followed were long and complicated. Marcus pleaded guilty to multiple counts of identity fraud, computer crimes, and conspiracy. He received a 6-year sentence with the possibility of parole after 4. His mother stopped speaking to me entirely. Friends from the old life, people who had known Marcus since he was small, treated me with a careful distance that felt worse than open anger. I understood. I had turned in my own son. There was no version of that story that felt comfortable to anyone. I kept working. I performed surgeries with the same care and precision I always had. I published a paper on a new technique for minimally invasive valve replacement. I trained residents and attended conferences and maintained my professional reputation without flaw. At night, I went home to my empty apartment and ate simple meals and read medical journals until I was tired enough to sleep. A year after Marcus's sentencing, I received a letter from him. It was short, written in his neat, small handwriting. It said he had a lot of time to think. It said he understood now what he had done, the scope of it, the harm he had caused to people who were already vulnerable. It said he was angry with me for a long time, but the anger had burned out and left only a tired kind of clarity. It said he did not know if we would ever have a relationship again, but if we did, it would have to be built on something more honest than what we had before. It said he was working on himself, trying to become someone he could respect. It ended there, no signature, just his name printed at the bottom. I read the letter many times. Then I wrote back. I kept my response brief. I said I was proud of him for taking responsibility. I said I would visit if he wanted me to. I said I had made the only choice I could live with, and I hoped he could understand that even if he could not forgive it. I said I loved him. I sent the letter and did not expect a reply. 3 weeks later, he wrote back. He said yes to the visit. So I went. We sat across the glass again and picked up the phones again, and this time we talked about small things, neutral things, the books he was reading, the classes he was taking. It was awkward and careful, and nothing like what we had once been. But it was something. It was a beginning. I do not know if we will rebuild what was lost. I do not know if my son will ever fully forgive me for that phone call. But I know I can look at myself in the mirror without flinching. I know I made the choice that honored the values I had spent my life trying to uphold, even when those values demanded more than I thought I could give. I know that integrity sometimes means standing alone in a quiet house and deciding that the law and the common good must come before the instinct to protect your own child at any cost. I still think about that afternoon, standing in Marcus's bedroom with the safe door open. I still feel the weight of that decision, the way it divided my life into before and after. But I would make the same choice again. That is what it means to live according to principles instead of convenience. You do what is right even when it costs you everything. You accept the consequences and you keep moving forward. That is all any of us can do.